pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach Invention number 8 in F Major by Johann Sebastian Bach. It, of course, sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. This piece is a great introduction to Bach's two-part inventions. I usually teach this one or the number 1 in C major as a student's first invention before I have them go on to others that are more intricate or difficult technically or musically. Part of the reason that these two are great introductions is that they are pretty straightforward. And whereas number 1 has some ornaments in it, this one does not. So that's one reason it's straightforward. They're easier to understand harmonically in many ways. Now this one goes fast. It's got a lot of, fingery, intricate 16th note things going on, and people like to take it at a fast tempo. So for that reason, number 8 in F major here tends to be a little bit more of a technical etude along with an introduction to Bach's inventions. And for that reason, I might actually choose to teach the C major even before I teach this one. If you have questions about progression of Bach's pieces suitable for students, particularly late elementary up to early advanced, I am thrilled to tell you that I have a brand new resource called the Bach Leveler. The Bach Leveler is a spreadsheet with my own leveling system. I've made a grouping system of just Bach's works that I've also set up side by side with listings in some of my favorite intermediate repertoire series like Masterwork Classics and the Festival Collection, as well as 2 syllabi listings, including the RCM. So you can see my own ideas about particularly leveling and grouping Bach's pieces according to difficulty, alongside some other wonderful people and syllabi as far as how they have leveled them. So go into the description of this video and check that out, please. I think you'll find it very, very helpful. I'm also using 2 of those series that I just mentioned today as additions. I have Masterwork Classics Level 7, as well as the Festival Collection Book 6, and then I'm comparing that with my Henley Urtext. These are 3 editions that I would all recommend. That said, I usually do have my students, once they are ready to play an invention, purchase the Henley Urtext, because I think it's just one of those great first Urtext, more expensive, fancier books to own. And I would encourage you to check out all 3 of these editions. I will link them as well in the description of this video. One of the things I wanted to compare, besides general editorial markings in the 2 intermediate books, is fingering, and we're going to come back to fingering later, so stick with me. Our students need to be able to play fluently in F major. That's not a very difficult key. They need to know the key signature, the scales, and the basic chords, as well as kind of what it means to play broken chords in that key, because after all, that's a broken F major chord followed by a F major descending scale with a couple of little turnarounds. So right away we have some very obvious F major technical things going on. And then students should also understand that F major's dominant is C major, and we're going to spend some time in C major as well. Those are just very basic theory things that should be easy at this stage. Whenever I start an invention or other contrapuntal work, such as a fugue, with a student, the first thing we do, besides listening to it and having an idea of the general piece, is we find the subject. My idea in this piece is that the subject is those first 2 measures with the ascending broken chords and then the descending scale pattern. That's immediately imitated in the left hand, and imitation is a word that I would want my students to know at this stage. And of course, then we find it other places, such as measure 12. It starts in the left hand, the lower voice, in C major. That's a direct transposition of that. And then, of course, it does that in the right-handed measure 13 as well. So that's the first thing I do. We talk about the subject and then we find it everywhere, even if it's not in the same key. We're going to need to look for G minor in this one. We find all the places where it happens. Along with that, I might explain that sometimes the composer uses just part of it, and that's called a fragment. And you do find that little arpeggiated chord all over the place in this particular example, the eighth notes that are ascending, something like, that's measure 4, left hand. We can talk about, when is it a fragment? When is it really the full subject, which in my opinion is both measures. If you have questions about starting a student on a piece like this, like what do I do in the very first lesson? I'm actually going to make a second video, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That should come out next week after this one. And in that video, I'm going to specifically talk about the introduction process, what I do in the first lesson with a student. This is something I'm very passionate about because I do feel like we can set students up to have a really positive experience with a difficult piece in their first week of practice, or we can kind of throw things at them and leave them to the wolves and see how the week goes. And I would always rather lead that process, particularly with something like a student's first invention or a student's first sonatina or a student's first Chopin nocturne, when they're getting introduced to a style or a type of piece. So be sure to check that out later. All right, when we have that subject, I think one of the reasons this is so straightforward is that I think it's so easy to shape the subject. Crescendo going up, diminuendo coming down. With that top note being the climax, the peak of where you're going. You can even, if you have a real visual student, just talk about it being a hill or a mountain. You climb up and then you ski down or you slide down or whatever you're doing. And that every time that happens, and even every time the fragments of those broken chords happen or a descending scale, you can use that same idea. Once a student has learned it, that will automatically make this piece come to life. If every time we have those motives, if that voice stands out because it's getting louder and crescendoing in that. So for instance, if you look at measure 7, the right hand should crescendo up to the downbeat of 8, and then the left hand gets to take it over. And just shaping simply like that, like I said, will make this come to life. I do want to highlight one thing that tends to be a stumbling block for students, and that is that there are two places in this piece where both hands arrive on the same note. The first one is the downbeat of measure 3. They both have the F marked. And the next time it happens is the downbeat of measure 18 where they both have a G. Students get really thrown off by the fact that their thumbs are colliding on that note. So it's helpful to decide which hand am I going to play that with and just cross it out of the other hand. I think both of those instances it should be played with the left hand because that is the peak of the subject. It's coming up to that F, up to that G, and then tumbling down. And the right hand can just rest on that eighth note and then move on with it. All right, let's dive into fingering. I wanted to compare the fingering in these 3 books, and I think overall I like Helen Marlay's fingering in the Festival Collection book the best. I think she also includes the most. And I already, as I was preparing this video, marked out a couple of her finger numbers that I didn't like, but I think I just generally agree with her choices the most. So one thing to note, you can decide on the peak of the subject with your right hand either to use your number 5 or your number 4, but every edition agrees that that next note, the E, should be played with finger 3. And then we have these little contraction fingerings. You get to the C, contract and play 4, contract and play 4. It's easy with the left hand because you just land on your thumb and you just keep going from there. Some of the other patterns are more difficult with the left hand. I'll give you an example of a place that I changed Marlay's fingering. In measure 7, she suggests 4, 2, 3, 1. And then change to 3. I actually prefer just to go from 4 to 1, that little contraction. I just really like, personally, the rotation of 3 and 1. And actually when I compared that with Jane McGraw's Masterwork Classics edition, sure enough, she puts a thumb on that F right after the downbeat of measure 7. This is why teachers should own a variety of good editions. You can be working with your student, even if your student owns one book, you can be working with them. And if they're having trouble on one little technical passage, you can say, well, let's try a couple different fingerings, or let me look in my other book. Do they suggest a finger 2 there or a finger 1? And you can have them try multiple things. And then by all means, feel free to cross out the fingering that's written and add one that you like better. I do think fingering is a personal choice, and that's why you don't hear me talk about it a lot I do talk about it, but I more want teachers to own good editions, to compare fingerings, to try different things, and then just remember that every pianist's hand is a different size and a different shape. Some of us have, wider span here. Some of us are more constricted. Some people have very long, thin fingers. Some of us have shorter, stumpier fingers. So fingering should be a personal choice. While there are things that will make a difference, knowing that certain things make a difference both for comfort as well as for articulation and the sound that you're going to end up achieving given the fingering that you decide. All right, sending a student home to practice this, I would definitely find bigger sections as well as talk about smaller chunks. I'm going to mention the sections that I use on this piece in that other video that's coming next week. But I will just say, I think there's a main cadence point at measure 12 when we arrive on the C. That's a great place to have a new section. And I think you can then find a third bigger section point in the next 2/3 of the piece. Find whatever sections work for you for those bigger ideas, and then you can break that up, as I said, into smaller chunks. Technically, I like to use a lot of rotation on this piece. You get little mini rotations in places such as measure 5. And you also have bigger opportunities for rotation, both slow, that's measure 15, or where the left hand has these quick rotating passages like measure 19. You really have to do something with that 4-5-4 to rotate it. And then you can just, have this motion. If your student tries to play that little motive, measure 19-20, with just finger motion, it just hurts to even try to do that and look at it. It will not be even. They won't be able to play it fast. The rotation totally opens up a new fast tempo that they can't achieve with just finger motion. So, and then it's not even tight once you finish doing that. Same is true of down at measure 24. It really allows you to play that much faster, much cleaner, much more efficiently. All right, let's talk about tempo. Students love to play this piece fast. Professionals love to play this piece fast. The same is true of the Invention number 13 in A minor. I do have a video about that, and I addressed tempo quite a bit in that video, so go check that out if you want ideas on practicing for tempo. I just wanted to mention that I clocked a couple of professional recordings. Angela Hewitt plays this around 144. Andra Schiff plays this around 124. Gieseking, like Hewitt, is up around 144. The only one that was more of a student tempo, in my opinion, is Glenn Gould. He plays it right around 100, and Helen Marley, in parentheses, suggests a tempo of about quarter note equals 100. I think 100 is a great goal for students. I do think that's still pretty fast for a lot of students who are encountering their first invention. So they need to have good fingers, and they need to be willing to do some technical practice that's going to allow them to play at that speed. And I just always caution my students when they are playing a piece that professionals and students play at a very fast clip. Be careful when you're listening to those recordings that you don't only get that tempo in your head. Students should practice at a variety of tempos, a slow tempo, a medium tempo, and of course their performance tempo. And students playing this in a performance, whether it's a recital or an exam or a festival, they need to be equipped by the teacher on how to start this at the tempo they want to take, because frankly, that's really easy to play at just about any tempo. And so they need to have some sort of process that they can go through when they sit down. I would advocate for something like the following. Take a nice deep breath, feel your feet on the floor, feel your rear end on the bench, take one more breath, And then find a spot towards the end or in the middle that is a more technically tricky spot and imagine that in your head. So maybe that's something like measure 19 with that left hand rotation. And think 1, 2, and 3. Hear that tempo and then start at the beginning. I will also just throw out there that hearing the backbeat on this, feeling the last 16th note of each group of 4, 1 E and da, 2 E and da, 3 E and da, while it's not musical, you would not want to accent those notes. Feeling that last 16th note can really help a student rein in their tempo if it's running away from them on this particular piece. If we just finish with the ending, I do think with this final chord and the octave in the left hand that comes before it, the 5, 5, 1, should be treated as a nice grand ending at a strong dynamic and a full quarter note with a full release after everything that has tumbled right before it. The last line is so fun to play, a little bit difficult, but so fun to play, and then make sure the ending is solid, exciting, important sounding, very grand, and that you finish it with a release before you move on to taking a bow or looking at your audience. So something like this. I hope that gives you some ideas on how to teach this wonderful piece. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Do check out the Bach leveler linked below and all the other things I've provided for you in the description. Best wishes in your teaching and playing.